Hello lovely people, Thyworm here with a build guide for last Epoch patch 0.9. This is my Shattered Yeti because it's using the Shattered Lance set and it's a monster. Yeah, sorry about that, but I like giving my builds a name for easy reference, and this is all I could think of. The good news though, this is a very solid build, Shatter Strike build that well exceeded my expectations. It's easily clearing 200 plus corruption so far, it has very few downsides, and it is, I feel, an interesting way to play the skill. And it's fun. I'm level 97 with this character, that should tell you something, I've been grinding a lot. So, let's dive in. All sorts of useful links are in the description. I will say though that this is more of an intermediate build as it does require some items and I do have decent to good gear. But still, I'm always aiming to create honest build guides. This one is no different, so let's look at the pros and cons. Here are the pros. It is a well-rounded character, able to do maps and bosses alike. We are freezing the majority of enemies, which is cool, pun intended, but it's also helping out with defenses quite a bit. It works on low budgets, but also skills with various interesting uniques. Shatter Strike clears a large part of the screen, and for a melee ability it feels amazing. It is tanky due to a ton of ward generation. Leveling is smooth too, with Mana Strike and Shatter Strike as soon as you pick your mastery. Then the cons, it's pretty slow, that is really the only downside. This could be countered with legendary boots, which I am not using. Let's start with the build requirements. There's really only one requirement, and that is that you need to have the Shattered Lance set. They both drop from God Hunter Argentos from the Stolen Lance timeline, and each piece has a 50% chance to drop. So farm him for a little bit and you should get this set. That's the only must-have to play this specific build, as everything revolves around this set. Other uniques are decent upgrades, but I will cover those in the gear section and explain why they work. Then the build philosophy. My build philosophy in general is just that I want to play fun builds or make specific item combinations work. I don't start theory crafting up front, I just start with a simple idea, usually an item I want to use, and then I start leveling a character and see how it pans out. In this case, I wanted to use the Shattered Lance set and see how far it would get me, and this set does not disappoint at all. Let me explain how it works and why it works. This set has two pieces and an interesting set bonus, which we're using of course. The relic is the least interesting piece, it just provides some sort of standard freeze and cold stuff plus health regen. The sword is much more spicy because apart from pretty decent flat cold melee damage plus more freeze and health regen, it has a unique buff called D-Side. Makes sense because you killed a god, right? Or a god hunter at least. Whenever you kill a rare or unique enemy, you gain 20% more movement speed and damage for 15 seconds. This buff does offset the slow movement speed a little bit, plus it's a nice more damage multiplier. The most interesting part, however, and the staple of this build and why it works, is the set bonus, which provides 15% increased melee cold damage per 10 health regen. That is what we are scaling. I am currently at 320 health regeneration, which equals 480% increased melee cold damage just from the set bonus alone. You could take it much further, I think double this number is actually achievable, but you would be giving up too much other stats in my opinion. So that's the whole build philosophy. I chose to not venture into crit, but make this a non-crit hard-hitting build instead, leveraging more relics and more damage multipliers. So what do you need in terms of stats? Here is the wish list. In terms of defenses, make sure to get res capped of course and ideally get 100% crit avoidance. I don't have that however, and I'm not dying very often due to my high ward. The blessings in the Monolith can help a lot here too, as well as idols. Then, we don't really skill health, but we use ward pretty much as soon as we get access to it, so around level 30 or so. Catalysts are super helpful here. That means you get ward on hit, ward generation, ward retention, all that stuff. Also intelligence helps. Mana and mana regen are nice because Shatter Strike does cost quite a bit of mana. In terms of offense, we're scaling health regeneration. There is flat health regen on helm, boots and gloves, and increased regen on pretty much any gear piece. Both are equally important, and a tier 6 or 7 flat health regen piece is going to give you tons of damage. Health regen is a very common affix, which helps. Other offense should be flat melee cold damage. Only after this you would look at anything that scales elemental or cold damage, because your health regen already gives you so much scaling. You really really don't need to craft that on other items. Instead, take more niche stuff like Chill, Frailty, Armor Shred and Cold Penetration. Those stats will benefit you much more as increased damage has diminishing returns. An increased area of area skills is also quite useful, I found. Let's look at the skill specialization and the skills that we're using. I will not discuss each point invested, but instead focus on the most important nodes. You can see everything in the build planner yourself, including the order in which I leveled up the skills. Let's start with Mana Strike, because that is your leveling skill until you can access Shatter Strike. I first pathed towards Spark Charges, because those do some AoE damage, it's pretty good. I also leveled using the Fire Starter's Torch, which is an excellent twin leveling item for this. As soon as you get Shatter Strike, you respec Mana Strike and turn it into a mana resource. Shatter Strike is very expensive at the start, so you need this to regain mana. First take Swift Sap, followed by Mana Drain, and then to Arcanist's Blade. Then I filled up Sprite Blade, and finally I took Rage Sap. Up next, Flame Ward. I autocast this ability, by the way, you don't have to. I first focus on damage to help us get through the campaign, so take Dilation, Fire Aura and Frost Ward to turn all the bonuses into cold. Then we scale flat damage with 4 out of 5 through Flames. Then we take Ward with Energize and Recollection. And finally we get more tanky using 2 out of 3 Prismatic Buffer and Barrier for 40% less damage taken. Up next is our main ability, Shatter Strike. I first pathed to 2 out of 2 Whiteout, making it cast 3 times in total, but also making this skill very expensive. In the campaign, however, it's fine. To offset the mana cost a bit, take 5 out of 5 Icy Flow. I then took 5 out of 5 Shiver, 4 out of 4 Absolute Zero for more damage multipliers, and any remaining points I had I put in increased attack speed to offset the debuffs a bit, using Ice Blink. You could argue adding an additional damage multiplier with Cold Presence, but this one is situational and only works on high health enemies. It's good for bosses I guess, but I'm not a big fan of situational damage. Then a huge damage buff autocasted by the game itself, it is Enchant Weapon. Starting with 4 out of 4 concentration, increasing its duration. Then path to Kindling Blade, so it autocasts. I'm taking Desperation, because you're often on low mana when you cast Enchant Weapon. Then we take 5 out of 5 Frostbrand for a ton of flat damage. We do another 5 out of 5 Celerity for attack speed. And we round it out with the remaining points in Frozen Sparks and Efficacy to reduce the mana cost. Finally, our movement ability, Teleport. You can spec Teleport in many ways, there's no real right or wrong here I feel. I felt I didn't need damage, so I wanted the buffs mostly. Take 5 out of 5 Time Dilation to make those buffs last a long time. Then I went for the whole ward cluster with Ether Barrier, Out of Body, which works well because we're typically at full health. 5 out of 5 Stable Bubble for a load of ward retention. And that's it. Time to look at the passives. I have recorded, link below, the progression of the passives so you can see that for yourself in the planner. I'll just pick out a few nodes that I want to highlight. Arcanist is good for int and resistances. Mage Flurry is amazing for attack speed, and 5 out of 5 Warden you want for ward retention. The Spellblade tree focuses on more flat damage, more ward generation in all sorts of ways, more attack speed and some mana generation with Mana Reaver. Volka's Razor deserves a shoutout because our Shatter Strike costs more than 10 mana. It gains 150% increased elemental damage because of these nodes, making these 10 points very efficient. Then, also very important, gear. I already explained the set pieces and how that works, but there are a few more interesting upgrades. I chose to not scale crit, which is probably, contentious, but okay. Instead, I thought I would make use of the 15% more Singularity idol that I found. That prevents you from doing crit damage, but we don't scale crit at all, and 15% more damage after some testing seems to be worth it. On bosses, there is another idol you could use, the Throne of Ambition, which drops from Argentis as well, like the set item, so you're farming this anyway, there's a decent chance you're getting this. And this thing, when stacked up, provides 40% more cold damage. And while bossing, that is very achievable. We are typically standing still, just doing a bunch of damage. Just don't use this in the regular echoes, it's completely pointless. Plus, I found another Ocearian ring, which shocks enemy and easily reaches 10 shock debuffs because we attack so quickly, so that's another 10% more damage. On bosses, this starts to add up, and each piece you use here is very significant. But don't worry, I didn't start with all of this, I still did fine progressing the Monolith. I found most of these uniques much later on in the endgame, but I still wanted to, shout them out because I think they're helping the build quite a bit. The rest of the gear clearly focuses on health regen as our main scaling stat. I found a +3 Shatter Strike chest, which of course helps, and a +3 Enchant Helmet, also amazing. Overall, this is definitely good gear, but it's far from min-maxed. It's part of the reason I'm calling this an intermediate build guide. Finally, I opted for a catalyst because I think it's hard to beat the ward you get from this item. And you do need a good amount of ward, or you will start dying left and right. If you feel squishy at any point during your playthrough, get more ward generation and ward retention. It is a lifesaver. For idols, like I said, I am using the Singularity, the Throne of Ambition on bosses, and then idols with ward generation on them. Just fill out the idols to your own needs. Also for resistances, you can also get a decent amount of health regen on idols, but that's really up to you if you want more of that. For blessings, I'm taking mostly resistance blessings because I don't want to deal with resistances. I do, however, have the Cold Resistance Shred blessing, which on bosses provides 10 stacks of Cold Res Shred, which is -20% Cold Res, which is another 20% more damage multiplier. You can see why these bosses at some point become, quite easy, convenient, and go very smooth. I created a loot filter specifically for this build. Please use this at your own risk, however, because it's tailored to my needs and it might contain some mistakes. For example, I put in level restrictions so that at some point at certain character levels, the rule simply doesn't apply anymore. I used this thing myself though from the start and leveled all the way to level 97 using this filter, so it's pretty good, but I'm sure it's not 100% perfect. Let me walk you through it. I recolored idols for you with affixes that you want. I made flashy green all the affixes that give you levels for the skills that you're using. I made grey all the items outside your build with at least tier 4 class specific affixes so you can disenchant those. The loot filter shows normal items until level 10. It shows the best usable one-handers until character level 68 because that is when you can use the set sword, and movement speed boots are green. And then there are more colors for all of your other loot, starting at the bottom with yellow and gradually getting stricter all the way to purple. At some point I put a level cap on most of these rules, so yellow items will show up until a certain character level and then not anymore. Should be smooth sailing. Here's the build in action. You will notice this build is slow, which could be countered by a good legendary boots, but I just don't have those. However, killing a rare or finding a movement shrine eases the pain considerably. This is really the only downside of this build that I can think of, because otherwise it shatters everything. Still at this corruption level, which is over 200, and I'm sure it can do much higher corruption as well. I just don't want to keep farming corruption stacks, I would rather try out the next build. The playstyle itself is very straightforward. You teleport for a movement, you shatter strike a bit, and you mana strike to get your mana back. You only need to hit 3 times or so with mana strike to be at full mana, so it's not much of a hassle. You'll get into the rhythm of using the 2 abilities soon enough, especially in endgame. Bossing is just as smooth. The amount of ward generation enables you to tank through most of the boss's abilities, barring the most devastating ones. Also at 200 plus corruption, I have up to 1250 or so health and around 2 to 3 times that in ward, so that's around, like 3500, 4000 health, and add to that a bunch of less damage taken multipliers and you're all of a sudden quite tanky. It feels good to play. It is solid, its damage is solid, and the set proves to be very usable. Talking about leveling for a bit, it is quite smooth, although this time I did use twink items like the Firestarter's Torch, the Falcon and Morning Frost. And this shouldn't be a starter build anyways, because you should already have this set, meaning you probably have a few leveling uniques too. As soon as you are a Spellblade, start using Shatter Strike, and then really that's all you need. Let's talk some Monolith Modifiers. There aren't any modifiers that are detrimental, although chill and slow can be detrimental to your sanity while playing this build. We don't crit, so crit avoidance is okay. We freeze most enemies, so stuff like Enrage and Frenzy is fine. Deadly is not, but deadly is never fine. And watch out a bit with giving monsters, 139% increased void damage. But yeah, that should go without saying, I guess. I spent a good chunk of time on these guides, which is why I don't release too many of them. If you appreciate the effort, consider liking or subscribing, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching, see you soon. Love you all, bye bye.